Hi, and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast with Grant and Louise Bentley. We have run the Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy since 1995. We are both qualified practicing homeopaths, and Grant is also a naturopath. Together, we discovered a link between energy and facial structure based on traditional ideas from homeopathy that have roots going back 200 years. This project is called Homeopathic Facial Analysis, or HFA for short, and has been the cornerstone of clinical diagnosis and training courses since 1999. Between us, we have written and produced 7 HFA books, including Soul and Survival. Soul and Survival is the philosophy of energy influencing matter and how this energy forms individual facial structure, our unconscious drives and fears, our life patterns, and universal time cycles.
Hi everybody, and welcome once again to this next episode of the Soul and Survival podcast, and welcome to Louise again.
Hi,
How
Grant.
are you?
I'm good, not too bad. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
That's good, okay.
So, you're the ones with the questions.
Oh, okay.
So
Well,
what's today's surprise?
Well, we were just having a chat about some of the last podcasts, and we did do a semi-deep dive into drug pictures and their disadvantages and the HFA process, and always fascinating. And as you said to me, I'm always going to end up going back to that place. If you get me on that topic, that's where I'm going to go, which makes total sense. But I said to you, let's do something different. And that's about the extent of it. So this is the difference. Is going to be a conversation we had a couple of nights ago, which I took some notes on. I remember you saying, Tom, what are you doing? I said, I'm just taking some notes.
Okay. I feel like the pharaoh.
I know, you were just chatting. Anyway, I'm cutting in. There were about 3 major topics, but I'm just going to cut into one, and it is a massive topic. This is what you said, so I'll just read out a few things, then I'll let you go.
Remembering it was Friday night.
You only had like one beer. It's not like this was the whole big party thing.
No,
I
know.
You were very clear. It was very interesting. You halfway through you said everything is endless. It's like homeopathy or nature. And I know you say this a lot, that homeopathy tells you everything about life. And then you said the only 2 things that are true are basically, you're saying homeopathy and nature. You said homeopathy is the rules of nature that our 5 senses can't conceive. Then you talked about the vital force is the same daemon that was you 1,000 lives ago. In each life, the same daemon is in each life, then it becomes you. Each one still exists. This is true. This is how life works. This is the simillimum. Potency splitting is the same. Humans work the same. Everything and everyone exists for all time. We are all seeds from the same plant. You don't have to believe in homeopathy. It is a system. It doesn't require your belief to exist. It's the same with God. Belief just makes your life better. It's just something to hang on to. Now, there's a lot in all of that.
No,
a lot.
A lot.
Go wherever you want with that, but I just found that
Well, I've
fascinating.
forgotten even the first bit now. By the time we get to the end, I've forgotten
all right.
number 1.
Everything is endless, like homeopathy or nature.
Yeah, well, that's sort of a little self-explanatory. I think that, and I think a little later on, you've got down that I start going into references about plants and things like that. It's only because, look, I've always found, as you know, a foundation in the natural world. And now this is going to make a noise, but I have to move that. I've always found a foundation in the natural world, my foundation in the natural world. People go to different spots to find their you, and that's where I go. We used, as you know, used to kayak out on the bay and all sorts of things. So because we're up in the mountains now, I've sort of taken up the whole gardening pursuit. However, doing that, I've scratched my eye and I've smashed my shoulder. I didn't realise the
gardening's very dangerous.
I didn't realise gardening was such a blood sport. But anyway, I mean, in doing that, look, you just learn from everything, don't you? And one of the things that I do I really like doing, and I don't know, I can't explain why I like doing it. I just really like doing it. And it's propagating plants. Taking cuttings or taking roots or even splitting open seeds and replanting them and just watching that come to life and then replanting, say if it's a cutting, which I know is a clone. Like, so when you do there are two types of propagation really. One where you can kind of collect the seeds and now you've got different plants that are going to grow. But when you do a cutting, you're essentially cloning that same plant, but you are turning it into something different.
So the seed is not a clone. Is this like a child of parents?
No, a seed is not a clone. Yeah, well, if you want to take that analogy, yeah, like the eggs and sperm of the male and female in a human being creating a completely separate life. But essentially what you're doing when you're taking a cutting is that, I'm taking an aspect of you. I wrecked my shoulder, so I'll take my shoulder off and I'll grow another me out of that shoulder. That's essentially what a cutting is doing. Yeah. So it's the same plant. It's a clone of the original plant, but it still becomes its own plant with its own root system and whatever. It's just that it's a complete replica. Which I find really interesting even in itself. But just I guess, what's all this got to do with homeopathy? Well, it's got to do with the making of the remedy. Essentially, that's what you're doing. Whenever we make a remedy from another remedy, we're cloning that remedy. And so that's why we're further down the list where I say that you can learn about all of life through homeopathy. I really think that that's absolutely true, because the material world shows you the outcome of the laws of life, but homeopathy is the law of life. How homeopathy works is replicated in every aspect of how the material world works. It's the collection of energetic laws that the material world, kind of like a mold, gets poured into and has to obey. And it can seem, without homeopathy, to be very confusing, but once you understand homeopathy, then you can understand how most of life works. Now, I when you were talking about, life is endless and all that, I don't mean to sort of tread on any religious toes, because every religion has its own, kind of unique set of its beliefs and so on. And people can be pretty firm on those beliefs. And it's not up to me to say those beliefs are incorrect or anything like that. So I'm not sort of trying to do a religious talk. But what I'm talking about, I guess, is that homeopathy teaches me how nature works. And you can replicate that over and over. So meaning, like, you can get a China 30, using China as because that was Hahnemann's first remedy. So you make a remedy out of that China. Now you go and get some ethanol, or you go and get some lactose, and then you put that original China remedy, let's say 30C, into some more lactose, or into some, just a couple of drops, or into the ethanol and water, give it a bit of a shake around, and now you've got another 30C. And people sit down there and go, well, that's just ridiculous. You're just pushing me to. What do you think a cutting is? That's exactly what it is. Life does it all the time. Lizards will drop their tail and grow another one. I mean, it's completely that. I mean, that, and so that's what I mean, is that it's not that homeopathy replicates life. It's not like art replicating reality. It's that it is life. It's the same laws, except in a very condensed version. So you can, because by the time it filters down into the material world, and then it's then kind of the material world adapts itself to a whole range of other stress conditions and additives, it can be really hard to perceive the underlying laws, whereas homeopathy doesn't have those sort of stresses placed on it, those modifications. So it's
Do you mean like limitations, like it literally is infinite?
No, I don't mean limitations, I mean adaptations. They're the laws in its purest form, right? That's what I mean. It's the laws in its purest form. And if you understand those laws, you can apply it. Now, human beings are not separate from the world. Now, clearly we can't clone ourselves. I can't actually just grow another shoulder or anything, or luckily I had a good surgeon that put it back together. But you know what I mean? We can't do that. But when you're looking at life itself, I find it really difficult for me to believe in anything else other than reincarnation. It draws me back to life after life after life after life, simply because that's what homeopathy does.
That's your faith in homeopathy is so huge, having seen what you've seen for 30 years, that you feel confident in saying that.
Oh, absolutely.
Amazing.
I feel so confident in it. If I can't see it in the homeopathic principles, you're probably wrong.
Yeah.
That's how I view that. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong, but I'm not going to accept what you say if it deviates from the laws of how I understand homeopathy to work. Now, the way that I understand it from a sort of soul, kind of quasi-religious perspective, is that, and this is when you were talking about, well, I was supposedly talking about, I don't remember talking about the daemon, but
Really, you don't remember?
But no, because we went on to so many things.
We did. You do this
and
beautiful. You go off on tangents all the time, which is really quite a strength when you think about it, because you encompass so many topics. But, some of your evening or breakfast conversations are really amazingly interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Friday night and I'm talking about that. I mean, it's not a gas of a party, though, is it?
Well, I enjoy it. I'm pretty sure we've got some nice feedback on the podcast that other people are enjoying hearing your thoughts. So,
all right.
This ability to simplify, to see something huge and broad and amazingly large, but then condense it down. And you even gave a talk to me the other night on simplification and why you do it yourself, and that you don't feel it's that special a thing to do.
No, well, I take these incredibly complex issues and I break them down into the smallest digestible parts, not because I'm smart, but because I'm not that smart. I have to reconstitute it in a way that is kind of more understandable to me. And that means simplifying it, right? So there are other people that, I listen to podcasts and they go on, and I just I'm starting to get lost. And so what I have to do is to understand what they're saying is that, I have to pause the podcast, ask myself what it is that I think that they're trying to say, and then break it down to a simple form so I can understand what it is that I think, the message that they're trying to get across. And then I'll hit play again. So I'm not doing this because, breaking down these really sort of complex ideas because, I'm an Einstein. It's because I'm not Einstein. That's why I need to do it.
You could argue, though, that that's what Einstein did. I mean, there was some book, E equals MC squared. It had an orange cover. I cannot remember
It was
the author.
E equals. I remember reading that.
It was about 15 years ago. And I found, for me, being a very, I'm not a science person at all. I always thought of myself as more the art person. But I've come to see the value of science. And I read that book, and that was a simplification of the E, the equals, the M, the C, and the squared. Like, it was really nicely done. And I remember thinking, this is homeopathy at the time.
Yeah.
And I personally find the simplification really important. If you don't have a super maths science brain that lends itself towards complexity quite easily, you need simplification. You just have to understand our world.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, that whole science thing. I think a lot of people think that science is about studying something with ology at the end of it.
Or opathy.
Yeah. But it's not really. It's a process. It's a way of looking at a problem. It's really breaking it down to its bits and then Legoing this problem to get the construct at the end. Then smashing that construct
and doing it again,
and then saying, if I do the same thing again, will I get exactly the same output?
Yeah.
Right? Will I get the same construct if I do follow that exact same blueprint?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, once, twice, thrice, and so on, then that's really all science is. It's not what you study, it's how you study it. And when it comes to the human condition, well, this is where I'm going to extend a fair bit. It's not just about the physical body and talking about IgGs and, talking about all sorts of, kind of hepatocytes and all these Latin words. It's about seeing sequences and whether those patterns reproduce themselves. And one of the things that I think, with homeopathy, getting back to when you say that if I don't see it in homeopathy, do I think that it's real? Well, no, not really. I need to see some sort of pattern that is replicated in homeopathy, because I know that homeopathy is the pattern of life. So the pattern of life with homeopathy is that the physical affects the mental affects the physical. We have a mind that is different from our vital force. Now we're getting into purely humans. We're getting away from the garden and maybe even getting away from animals now. But there's a mind that is separate from the vital force. The vital force is an animation. But it does have memory and emotion. It's just that it doesn't understand what that memory and emotion is for. And that kind of sounds a little odd, and maybe we'll get back to that in a minute, but that's where life themes come in and colour groups come in, because it's a collection of a whole lot of mental and emotional reactions and protective mechanisms, but the vital force itself doesn't know why it has it. That's a cognitive reason.
And Hahnemann said that.
He does say that.
I mean, you wrote this, you did a beautiful book I will remind everybody of, that is the most overlooked book of the ones you've done. And it's called How Aphorism 27 Changed the World.
Yeah, who sent us that email saying it's the best book never read?
I know. And we know it. I remember you wrote it at the time because you were talking about, what would Hahnemann think of HFA? And you thought, I'll write a few notes. And before you knew it, I think it only took you 12 weeks or something to write. You had this lovely book where you reflected on the organon and you reflected on HFA and you reflected on contemporary homeopathy and brought it all together. And I've completely lost why I'm saying this.
Because we're talking about how, and that's aphorism 9, where he says that the vital force is separate from the reason, gift and mind, which we've discussed before. But so you have the vital force, but then you have the mind, but then you also have a soul that's over and above. And that when you were talking about that word, that daemon, which is kind of historically been a little distorted into demon and all sorts of, it's having these really nasty connotations to it. But essentially it's well, if you go into Buddhism and even Hinduism, it's the observer. Right? I mean, that's what it is. It's the observer that even observes the conscious, rational mind. So it's an overseer above that again. That's not physical. Even your mentals are not physical. Clearly.
Thoughts are not physical, emotions are not physical,
but they're
very real.
Linked to the physical body. So their ramifications are quite strong.
They're communicators.
Yeah, and that's why when I do a case, I will take the mentals and the emotionals into account. So it's not like, in say the last episode or a couple of episodes. It's often when you say, we talk about things like portraits, remedy portraits and things like that for a while, but they're foundations of how they're practiced. And it's a bit like talking about carbohydrates at the moment. You have when you talk about diet, because they are such a foundation of modern life that we really seriously need to get away from, at least in their magnitude of consumption.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to, every time you talk about diet, if you're going to talk about the right sort of diet, and I know that that's a really varied conversation, but the right sort of diet, as I understand it, you have to be talking about limited carbohydrate consumption, even if you mention it over and over again. And it's the same when we talk about personality profiles, all this kind of stuff. That's how modern homeopathy is practiced. But just like carbohydrates, there's an overconsumption of it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've had people say, if the majority think something's true, that it's sort of, they think it's like a democratic process, like the majority thinks something's true, therefore it must be true because the majority think it. But in fact, there's many cases in history of the majority thinking something's true, and later on it's turned out not to be true at all.
Well, what about bloodletting? Bloodletting was a prime, 1,000 years.
So it's an interesting thing to think of. The democratic process in science, sort of, it's not really where you should be going. N equals 1, I learned about. If one person experiences one thing, like Hahnemann proving China, one remedy, one proving, that can open up a whole scientific pathway that hasn't been explored before. And you only need one person to open that door. You don't need a million people to open the door all at once. They're the followers. And what they're following may not be the right path.
No, it may not be No, it doesn't have to be the right path at all.
Yeah.
How many people died in the witch trials? One of the biggest books ever written is How to Spot a Witch. It doesn't necessarily, but just because it's en masse doesn't mean that it's true. Hey, if how old am I? 62 at the moment. Coming up 63.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know why I keep forgetting that, but anyway, I do.
You're not good at maths.
It's clearly not important to me, but it's if there's anything that I've learned in my 62 point whatever years, is that human beings have an absolutely insatiable capacity to get it arse up. It's unbelievable. We can actually get something completely back to front
for a long time
and believe it and we're talking generations
or decades or hundreds of years.
Or in the case of bloodletting, thousands of years.
Like Galen's theory of health the theory of humours lasted 1,000 years,
something like
before it was challenged by modern medicine, including homeopathy. Challenged that.
Well, it wasn't modern medicine. It was homeopathy. Was actually the very first challenge was probably Paracelsus. He wasn't a real fan of it.
What we should do we should go into, we've got an extensive homeopathic library still, although we got rid of a lot. But haven't we got Julian Winston, what was that one called? It's
Faces.
Is it the Faces?
It's not Faces of Homeopathy.
Yeah, it's not Anthony Campbell. That was the Two Faces. And that Julian Winston book, which I don't believe is available anymore, but we've got a copy of it, is a fabulous, insanely good look at the implications and the history of homeopathy. I mean, it should be republished. It's an incredible book. I mean, he's passed now. He was in New Zealand. Don't even think he was a homeopath, or he was an observer and reporter on homeopathy, I think.
Know.
But fascinating stuff. But we should go through that, because some of the information in there is extraordinary. What those homeopaths did in the 1800s, just extraordinary.
But in the last paragraph of what we were just talking about, the other thing that I think that more homeopaths need to know about is probably Paracelsus too.
Yeah.
Now, I'm guilty that I don't know really that much about it.
So why is it important to you if you only know a little? Tell me.
Because the little that I know leads me to the understanding that he was the precursor of homeopathy. Absolutely no doubt about it.
And yet,
I mean, there was, for example, a really bad bout of dysentery going through one of the local areas where Paracelsus lived, and he earned a really good reputation for being able to treat that. And you know how he treated it? He got a little bit of their own fecal matter the size of a pinhead and put it into a glass and vigorously stirred and gave back.
Isopathy.
Yeah, an isopathy. But it's a precursor, right? And the other thing is that he had a triangle of health. Now, if we go into the miasms, there was a triangle called the Tria Prima, I think. The Tria Prima, where he talks about the fundamentals of mercury, salt and sulphur.
So close to our primary, where we've got mercury, sulphur, but NatMer
but I don't think they're meant to be taken literally, though, in the sense. So I get the impression. So what he did is that he broke things down into sort of solid, liquid and gas. And each one of those was a representative of one of those types. So salt would be a solid, for example, whereas sulphur will be an air. I think I've got that right, but I could capacity to get it completely wrong.
Remind people, because maybe they've never heard of Paracelsus, we did a lot of historical medical history as part of our homeopathic course. We had a very, very classical course, and we did do a bit on Paracelsus. So was it 1600s? Are we talking, or 1500s?
No,
1500s. So blue time. And location in Europe, where was he?
Swiss, I think.
Okay. All right, so, just to put it in the context that it's, 500 years ago.
Yeah.
And also another important thing I remember our teacher telling us was that even though it's clear there's a strong link between Hahnemann's ideas formulated in the late 1700s and early 1800s to these 1500s ideas, Hahnemann never made reference to Paracelsus at all.
And I don't know why she didn't, unless Paracelsus was, because he was such a controversial figure.
Yeah.
And again, you know what we should do? We should extend some of these podcasts out to getting a few more guests that are on allied topics.
On those
so
topics,
if anyone is a Paracelsian expert, contact us. Because I'd really love to know, because as I understand it, and again, I sort of highlight that my knowledge of Paracelsus is unbelievably rudimentary, but he was a really controversial figure. So it could be possible that Hahnemann was trying to
protect himself a bit.
Try and avoid the criticism of mentioning Paracelsus, because the whole thing about, there was we talk about Galen and the humours, but one of the other most well-known physicians was Celsus. And so I think he's von
You mean
Hohenheim.
Paracelsus, yeah?
Yeah, so Paracelsus
had a
means
very
above.
Yeah, he
right?
had a very long... All right, that was like a nickname.
Yeah, no, he nicknamed himself, right? I mean,
he was better than everybody else.
It was the modern term of saying, it'd be me, instead of saying Grant Bentley, I'm going to rechristen myself as Best One, right?
Why not?
Why not? So he sort of christened himself as Best One.
Okay.
Right? I am above Celsus. I'm,
Right.
no one. He book burned. He said, here's what I think about all of these previous physicians and their ideas. And he burned them all, So this is a guy who was incredibly controversial and unbelievably antagonistic. So he didn't mind stepping on toes. He was, well, to put it lightly, prickly.
Okay.
Right? So he made a lot of enemies within the profession. And it maybe Hahnemann just thought, well, he's not aligning with him is not the best start.
It's not a good way to promote homeopathy. I would suggest that's probably true because, again, we did the whole life of Hahnemann. I mean, it was a great course. When I look back on our course, I think that was actually, we've still got that whole course there. We don't have it in teachable form, but we have it in, as a college would, all the notes, etc. But we did the life of Hahnemann, and there's no doubt he was heavily criticised. And I think he would naturally be very sensitive to that, and to some degree he would have avoided it. And, a bit of a shame in some areas because he couldn't backtrack on things he'd said that possibly later on turned out not to be so true. Anyway, I've just looked up Paracelsus, just 1493 to 1541. So he lived 48 years. Wow, that's pretty young.
And there's a real sort of Columbo-like question mark over his death, by the way.
Oh, is there really?
Yeah.
Swiss physician born, here's this wonderful name, Theophrastus Philippus Aurelius Bombastus von Hohenheim. What a beautiful name.
yeah.
Isn't it gorgeous?
It's easier just to say Paracelsus.
And it just says here, look, I'll be in some basic website here. He developed a new approach to medicine and philosophy based on observation and experience. He saw illness as having a specific external cause rather than resulting from an imbalance of the bodily humours, and introduced chemical remedies to replace traditional ones.
Yeah, hence your sulphurs and your salts and your mercuries and so on.
Yeah, definitely a precursor to
it
homeopathy.
is an absolute precursor. And like I said, then breaking things down into 3 more specific types of chronic diseases, being the tria prima and so on, which go into being the miasms. I find the idea, like everyone rests on the shoulders of giants, right? And it includes Hahnemann. He didn't live in a vacuum, and particularly when he took over Brockenthall's library, who was some kind of
He was like a baron or something.
yeah, he was a baron, but he had this
Germany.
massive library of esoteric works and medical works.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about esoteric and medical works, remember astrology used to be a major part of the medical curriculum. Right? And nowadays we'd sort of look down on it, with these sort of really condescending pseudos. But how do you know it's not true? Might be true. Which doctor do you know that really fully understands astrology and its effect on the human body? Well, if you don't know one, how the hell do they know that it's completely wrong? I mean, you don't know these things. It might be completely wrong. But the fact is that we scoff at things that we really have no idea about. And a lot of the times and this is why Hahnemann, I think, probably didn't mention Paracelsus, is that we scoff at things because we like to join the club that's going to scoff at someone else. But if we're a member of that club, they won't scoff at us.
Yeah.
Right? So for our own protection, we generally join in and throw the stones rather than get hit by the stones.
And hence an erroneous idea takes off and can last a long time. Am I right? His wife, Joanna, her father, so Hahnemann's father-in-law, was he an alchemist? I feel like there was alchemy there.
Don't know.
Because you talk about that as well. Like he didn't just look into, Paracelsus, but there was alchemy. And that was kind of really dismissed at a certain point in time.
Paracelsus was absolutely an alchemist.
Yeah.
But he took that alchemy and he made it chemistry. That's why he's regarded as the father of chemistry.
Okay.
Or as chemistry as we understand it now. But even alchemy, we do a really strongly revisionist view of alchemy. We do a 21st century kind of very bitsy materialist mind.
How do we make gold? Isn't it?
That's what everyone goes on about. They just go, "Oh, the alchemists tried to turn base metals into gold." It's a catchphrase. We just say it straight away. But there was so much more to alchemy than that. So much more. In fact, alchemy was... They were really talking about a philosophical gold, right? They were talking about something that is going to develop the human being into its greatest potential that it could be. It wasn't a get-rich Ponzi scheme like we think that it is.
Which is so stupid, because if you could turn everything into gold, it would have no worth. I mean, it's its rarity and what it can... its special place in technology and its special place in making beautiful jewellery, etc. Its rarity is what gives it value. It would be worth nothing if you could just make it.
Yeah. So I don't know, but I think the idea that Hahnemann did not come across Paracelsian writings, I think that's a bridge too far. He wrote. Have you ever seen any of his books? They are ridiculous. They are foundations to a house. They are that big.
Hahnemann?
No.
Oh,
Paracelsus.
Sorry. Yep. Okay. No, I don't really know any more than what we did in sort of year one homeopathy.
I have tried to read a Paracelsian book.
Yeah.
But, good luck with it. The language is really difficult. Yeah. And also to remember that we're not trained in things like astrology. Well, I'm not trained in things like astrology, and it's a big part of his work and so on. But this sort of that there is a spirit to everything, well, that goes into Hahnemann. That definitely goes. And
that's homeopathy too, that there's... within the substances you choose to make a proving of, there is knowledge.
Yeah.
There's spirit or there's substance or knowledge within things.
Yeah. Well, they're the laws. And that's what I'm talking about. I mean, what a proving does is that it brings out the laws of each one of these plants and each one of these minerals. But the fact that, look, you can look at it from a chemical point of view and sort of say, well, no, you've got it back to front there, because when you do a proving, you're actually taking in the energy of that remedy, and then that's mucking with your mind, and then your projection is its influence. But I don't sort of see it like that. And well, the very fact that there's something in it for a start, that's that, when you talk about the E=mc² book. Homeopathy is just reverse engineering that and getting back to the energy that's inside it. But what is energy? Well, energy is just a set of laws and rules and things that... Information. Yeah.
And power. Information and power, kind of in some strange... complex twist.
Well, it's an animating power, yeah, definitely. Although it doesn't animate mineral form in that sense. It animates. So I guess...
And yet people say crystals emanate an emotional energy.
Yeah, but you can take a brick and it's not going to grow. It's not going to be.
Yeah,
it's not going to animate.
It's not organic, but maybe if you meditated on a brick, it might have some information to share
Oh,
with you.
it's got information,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is that the vital force's sole purpose isn't just to animate. It will animate whatever has the physical capability to animate.
So it's maybe learning.
This
as
is
well.
in soul and survival, right?
I know.
The thing is that what's inside a remedy is the addition of all the information that mineral, plant, animal and human being throws into that force. It imprints onto that force. And then indiscriminately, the vital force just dumps all that information. So let's just say...
How do you know it's indiscriminate?
Well, because it's not selective information. It's like epigenetics. You've got all these genes, but which gene gets activated and in what way depends on the circumstances. So they're a lock. So the vital force is like a lock, but which key is going to... That's a terrible analogy, actually. But you know what I mean? There's... What... All right, let me put it this way. We have a child, and that child is green. Okay, so now what happens at the moment of conception, that green energy goes into that child and just dumps all knowledge that's ever been accumulated, because remember, there's no physical form, so there's no limitation.
But it's only green knowledge.
It's only green knowledge.
It's all
only green knowledge.
It's important.
It dumps all a universe's worth of green knowledge into what I will call the unconscious. Now, we spoke about this once before when we thought about the definitions between subconscious and unconscious and so on.
Yeah.
So to me, the subconscious is kind of what you're not using all the time or what you're suppressing. So it's knowledge that doesn't need to be at the forefront, but it's accumulated in your lifetime. What I'm saying about the unconscious, and I know I'm using it in a non-Jungian, non-Freudian term, but what the unconscious is a whole bunch of information that is dumped into a green person, there to be used if circumstances need to, but unused if you don't. But it's all there. Like, we're not just talking about centuries worth or your grandparents all time. And I'm not even talking about just human beings, animals, plants, minerals. All of this information is dumped inside you. Now, you know this because you can do provings of plants like veratrum, and you get this whole kind of, you're talking to spirits, you can see Jesus, you can, all this religiosity that comes about. And you think, oh, well, that could be an interaction with the plant, but I don't think so. So I think what's happening is that inside every plant, inside every mineral, and inside every animal is all of the kingdom's experience dumped into it. But the thing with the plant is that it doesn't have the facility to be able to access human experience. But human experience can access other human experience. So, it's... Am I even making sense here?
I know what you mean, but I'm trying
it's just
to get
the way you're looking at me.
I'm trying to simplify it even more in my head. I need it to be really simple. Is this what you're saying? Are you saying that there's this knowledge that's dumped into every plant, every animal, every gas, every mineral, etc., which is miasmatic, one of the 7 groups, and it has all the knowledge of all time from that particular group, and it lives breathes and operates to that miasm for its own self-defense mechanism. And then when we make a remedy from it, that remedy has a whole bunch of information that's pertinent to the remedy and includes the miasmatic information too. And then we can match that to the person.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And it's like the vital force is something that surrounds, not just animates, but surrounds, and experience will imprint onto that vital force, right? So it gets really complicated here, but it doesn't have to be only, we live in a brown time now, right?
1950 to 2100 is your best estimate, yep.
Best estimate. So now what happens, though, is that this green child will have to adapt to brown. Brown doesn't adapt to it. And there'll be a brown influence on their green outlook. And so that will make life pretty darn confusing for that poor old green child now entering into the world, because they're seeing everything through green eyes, but they're seeing it in a brown time. But what that green child has is all the energy inside everything that would be determined as being green plants, green animals. Well, dogs are often green by facial design, whereas...
Not all, though.
No, not all, but then
often,
when you take a plant, for example, like...
aconite.
Aconite will do, right? So it's packed with all of this information. But the difference between the plant and the animal and the human kingdom is that we can add so much more to that vital force. We can add so much complexity to it.
We can think and speak. I mean, maybe dogs speak to a degree, but it's very, very limited. But a dog can see, a dog can smell, a dog can hear, a dog can touch. But its speech is limited compared to a human.
Yeah.
And a plant, I don't know, it can't see. Can it hear? I think it can hear vibrationally, can't
So
it?
what it has is that it has the basic laws of life, but those laws get added to with every evolutionary step forward in the complexity of the life form. So if we were only dealing with plants, then probably the vital force of green would not change ever, really. But now we're starting to add animals to it, and animals definitely have an emotion. And you're starting to add human beings.
Green animals, to be specific, because not all animals are green.
But now you're starting... No. I'm not even going to specify animals now. This is where it gets really tricky. So what the important part that human beings do is that they add to the evolution of the entire planet and every species that's on the planet. Because we are the major ones that add to the complexity stamp of the vital force that is then put into other creatures, which helps in their evolution.
So that's a huge responsibility that humans have.
It's a massive responsibility, and it's a massive responsibility to get it right and to get it as positive and as constructive as what we can. We live in a world where we have more comfort than any other time in history. We have information at our disposal, although you do have to work out what is real from mis and disinformation, and that can be really difficult. But we do have all of this information. We have a food supply. This is the only time in history where the biggest problem is eating too much. We have insulation everywhere to keep us warm. We have power supplies. That doesn't stop us bitching. Boy, do we bitch about life. And we keep on going on about how this is the hardest time in history and all of this kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm off track now. But what I'm saying is that we have a responsibility for creative evolution rather than destructive devolution. No. And that rests with us. So I'm going to ask you, just hang on, because I'm so easily distracted. So No, I am distracted. So where was I?
Well, you're talking about the responsibility of the complexity of the human in passing on and interpreting and creatively working with all that information.
Okay. So if I asked you what you were doing last Monday, you would probably have no idea.
Oh, no, I actually do.
Do you?
I do.
Well, now you've just wrecked my whole
I'm sorry.
story.
And no, I don't think I have, because it links into the hardest times of all and all that sort of stuff. We actually had a major power outage last Monday after a week of terrible storms, which continued for 2 weeks. Shocking winds, terrible winds. And I do remember it because when you have your power out for 5 days and your generator fails, which ours did, and you are trying to heat water on wood stoves, you are collecting wood, you are taking water out of a gravity-fed tap because you don't have water otherwise, your whole view of life, there's no television, there's no internet, you're working by candles, you just, everything changes. We had 5 days of power outage, and it was like seeing the world through a whole different lens of hardship. It was much harder. Much. And when the power came back on, you just flick the tap and the water comes out, or you flick the switch, or you go and look on the internet for whatever. Golly gee, what a difference. So I do remember it because it's extreme.
All right, so that actually doesn't destroy my story.
Oh, good.
That actually is not too bad, because what you're remembering there is the hardship.
Oh, so much.
So now you remember. Okay, remember the Monday before. What were you doing at 2:00?
Well, the only thing is because I've reflected so much on the 2 weeks, but that was when the wind started that Monday. But you can go back to the Monday before, and I definitely cannot remember that Monday.
All right. My point is, unless something is either, if something's not emotionally based, you don't remember.
Or hard. Hardship.
Yeah, but in the end, that's emotionally based too, because it's not actually a physical hardship that we're going, we're not pushing a rock up a hill.
No.
But what we are doing is that we're getting frustrated because we can't live the modern lifestyle that we want to live.
Yeah.
And our whole life is wrapped around modernity. We're not casting horseshoes for a living, right? So it doesn't, if that was it doesn't matter. I'll just throw another log on the fire. But the reality is that we are wrapped around the modernity of life. And so we're still trying, what made that difficult is that we're still trying to conduct our modern life under third world conditions.
Yeah.
And that's what made it. And that degree of difficulty created a real emotional frustration and fed upness.
Tiredness. It was very wearing.
Right. So that's why you remember it.
Yeah.
So the point that I'm trying to make is that the more emotional something is, the more committed to memory that becomes, right? And the vital force works in exactly the same way. And I'm not just talking about an individual vital force now. I'm talking about the whole green, because we'll stick with that.
Yep.
The whole green overlay. And you know how we were talking right at the beginning, how you have the body, then you have the vital force, then you have the mind, then you have the daemon, or you have, the daemon -observer -soul, whatever terminology you want to call it. Well, there's a classic example of how homeopathy works. And the homeopathy is just working in that same macro form. So what you have is that the more energetically charged a situation is, the more you remember that situation. So then what happens though, because what are you imprinting that charge onto? Well, it's an energetic charge, so you're imprinting it on the energetic body. Now your brain is able to access it because your brain's predominantly electric. I mean, it's full of fat and protein, making it physical with physical applications. But I mean, essentially memory, thought, all that, they're all electric, right?
Yeah.
So when you've got that emotional imprint. Emotions are really important for the human being because what they do is that they put the stamp of importance on it. So thought is something where you don't want to live by emotions. Otherwise, that's sort of, you go into that whole criminality thing of just self-gratification and living from one emotional crisis to the other, and your whole life will be wasted that way. So you've got to control emotions. No one's saying that they're should make them the focal point, but at the same time, they do stamp what's important and what isn't important in your life. And so when you experience a highly emotional experience, that gets stamped onto your vital force as a
memory.
As a memory, but as an individual. Mm-hmm. Now, you as an individual will then you'll stamp that on because your vital force is connected to the daemonic vital, not demonic.
AE.
Daemonic vital force, or the collective vital force, whichever
That's nicer.
one.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll do that one. The collective vital force.
Collective souls.
But if no one else experiences what you experience, then your imprint kind of gets lost. It's not a big imprint.
Yep.
But imagine if 1 million people experienced exactly that same sort of thing at exactly that time. Mm-hmm. All right, now that stamp imprint is so big that it becomes so influential that imprint is handed on to the next generation of greens. Now, why that becomes important is because the earth goes in cycles. And when you're in a green cycle, everything that happens in that time that has an emotional base gets stamped deeply onto that green collective miasm. And then that's handed into, you can have a child born in 2020 or another one in 2200 that's green, and they're still going to get that same stamp. Mm. And so
it's a continuum.
It's a continuum. Once it's there, it's there. And so when you look at the green time, which is 1800 to 1945...
50, just to 50.
Yeah, all right, 50, there you go.
49 and a bit.
Doesn't matter. But the main thing is that you had, 2 world wars for a start. Mm. I mean, you had World War II, even if you just take World War II.
It's huge.
Are we talking about that being an emotionless event? This caused the death of, the estimates go anywhere between 60 to 80 million. Mm. I mean, that's insane stuff, right? Absolutely insane.
And for a world population at that time that was probably only 1.5 billion, I think it was 1 billion at the turn of the century and 2 billion by, the 60s or something. So, it was not even, that's a big percentage.
It's huge. And then add in World War I, which was only 25 years earlier, in which 20 million people died.
Yeah.
I mean, just the emotional impact on this is insane.
But it's no different to the emotional impact of now. I mean, we're almost halfway through the brown time. You know what I'd like to do, Grant?
Say, that whole biblical saying where the sins of the father go to the son? That's what this means, I reckon.
Right.
Because these horrible impacts are going to be felt in green people for ever until they're changed by something else.
But also, it's hard to explain, but it's not just the green people that suffered. Everybody suffers, but you see it through the colour lens that you view life.
The collective was a green time.
Yeah.
So everything that happens in that green time gets stamped on that green collective.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that Yeah, that's right. Everybody who's born from later on from those times doesn't have that in their unconscious. Only green people have that in their unconscious. So what that is it's this. You imagine being, I don't know, we you know, our parents and grandparents, right? So they're in these two horrible situations of World Wars One and Two. You know, you imagine being in New Guinea. You know, that would, and I'm only choosing that because this is Australia, our war.
Yep. Our part in that war.
Our part in that war. This was the theatre that, you know, we really fought in. Every shadow could be an enemy soldier. You don't know, you can't see in front of you. You know, can you imagine the sensory overload that you would go into?
Well, that movie Kokoda, which was made about it, I found that so intense that I was covering my eyes and ears for at least half of it. I didn't even see and experience half of it. It was so
Yeah, but
overwhelming.
you do that over a TV commercial. You're hopeless.
No, not that bad. That was a particularly
No,
bad
it was
one.
tense,
It was
though.
really crazy tense and really well done. You got the sense of what it was like to be there, which means it was a very good movie because, you know,
Yeah, not much violence at all, but tons of tension.
anticipation.
Because you don't know. That's the jungle warfare that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Now, all of that tension gets imprinted onto the green collective.
Yep.
So a kid gets born now in, I don't know, 2080 and they're green. Now, what happens is that every green person from that point, because this is really strong, and the need for your senses and to look all around you and be aware of the circumference of your proprioception, not just what's in front of you, because you don't know where they're coming from. And the reality is that sort of tension gets imprinted, and so it becomes... Nature now uses that as a survival mechanism for everyone that's green, right? They're saying, watch out for this. So because we don't have poison, we don't have claws, we don't have strength of a bear, we only have our senses and our brain. So what nature does is that it passes on what it thinks are going to be the most likely stresses combined with the best adapted responses for getting out of it. So what happens now is that as a green person, you get really tired, really run down, your survival instinct switches on, and now what happens is that your senses start going crazy because the imprint tells you that you need your senses to stay alive. It doesn't discriminate. Remember, it's not a brain, it's an imprint.
It's interesting,
right?
isn't it?
So that's when we go back to aphorism 9. It's not your reason-gifted mind. You're not thinking this through. It's just an imprint and a reaction. And this is the problem, is that we're often reacting to memories that don't belong to us.
Until we take the right remedy and it calms that response
calms it down.
You've still got a really strong and good response to real threat and danger, which is important to keep and have, but not to memories. So what I was going to say before, and you probably want to, get toward the end of this now, is what I'd really like to do is I'm going to have a little look, if I've got time before the next podcast, at the previous brown time, which, I'll do my maths, was 900 AD to 1050, and then the orange time that comes after, 1050 to 1200, because we were talking just a little bit about some things that happened in the orange time, and you just made a few comments, and I thought the theme just leapt out at us.
Be prepared for some serious censorship here. This orange time. And you can see it building.
You can see it building, absolutely. And what I find really interesting is, we listen to a lot of independent information. I mean, that's where we do our research and our thinking from, not your mainstream, which tends to be packaged up in a kind of corporate model. We listen to independent, and one of the big fears of the independent movement is this attempt to censor free speech, which of course is appalling to people, say in the US, who think about their constitution, which is an amazing document.
It should be appalling to everybody.
It should be, but because the rest of us, anybody that's been born post World War II just takes freedom almost for a, in the Western world, we've just taken freedom for granted. Like we just always assumed, aren't we lucky? We got freedom. It'll always be this way. It's not looking quite that way now. But I reckon we could find some clues in looking at the previous brown time, emerging into the orange time, which is where we're going, not for 76 years, but it tends to start around the halfway point, and it starts to, like a rainbow, it just merges across. You know?
And I think you can see it's not, I don't think that there's a threat to liberty in the sense that, we're really going to be enslaved, or we're just going to be like the Eloi and the Morlocks of H.G. Wells's Time Machine. But I think you can see a sort of a gaslighting manipulation of, you're going to be free to make the decisions that I want you to make.
Okay, how nicely put.
All right, let's end it
there. All right, let's end it there. That's where hopefully we'll go next time, if we stay on track. Thanks, Grant. I love that. You. I thought that was really fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, it sounds like Friday night.
It could be a good Friday night. Okay then.
All right, thanks everybody. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch up with you next time. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Soul and Survival. If you are interested in more information, books, courses, consultations, learning more about facial analysis or life themes, please visit our college site, Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, vcch.org.